This is the internal stakeholder call or internal customer call for the verified testing group for August 27th, 2020. I'm going to jump right into the agenda. There was a question from Mech about recording this, which we always do, and then posting it for internal usage, which we always do. It's always on unfiltered, often as an unlisted video, just because we do sometimes talk about customers in here. But I always link to the recording in the agenda. If you go back, you can see the recording link for the previous meetings, and it gets posted into our group testing channel. I can post that more broadly. Absolutely, I'll start to post that into the quality channel as well, since y'all are an internal customer, so that you have more ready access to that. And then moving into the roadmap deck, we're not going to go through that today, as is our MO. I just want to call out a couple of the changes of note. The epic for the performance improvements on the unit test report has been closed out. That feature is now enabled by default on GitLab.com, or enabled on GitLab.com and enabled by default for self-hosting if they are installing. The other thing I said, we have changed the name from JUnit report to unit test report, just to stay away from trying to say it's just for JUnit tests or supportive Java to more broadly. So that was a verbiage change that you'll see in documentation and the category stuff around the site. So it's starting to try to use that more. And then across most categories, we're trying to work on smaller MVCs. I've linked to a smaller iteration of the test unit, or test history rather, MVC. We had started with test history at a project level. As we started to dig into that, we realized the architecture for the data storage for that was going to be hairy at best. And so we broke it down even further into a smaller, simpler change. And there'll be another MVC issue that pairs along with that. One to display this history on the test summary, and one to display this history on the unit test report. So we'll present the same data in both places. And I'll link that back in as well. That just came out of our team meeting this morning. I just haven't had a chance to make that update here. So that's just the quick things to call out of what has changed in the deck. I wanted to talk a little bit about today about our current balancing the needs and wants of internal customers with continuing to move forward on our key performance indicator for the group around paid group monthly active users, paid GMAU. So we're really focused on implementing new features or improving features that are at that premium or ultimate level, and a little bit at the starter as well. The good news is that a lot of those are dogfooding features as well. So things that we're already building for internal stakeholders, things like screenshots attached to the unit test report is at I believe at a premium level. Maybe that one is at core. Enhancements to the code quality feature set, that's all at a premium or a starter level. So these things, we're accomplishing both goals with a lot of our tasks. So we're not sacrificing right now one for the other, and we'll continue to try to balance that because so many of our categories are at a minimal maturity. One of the key components of moving to viable, which is always part of our direction, is it is broadly used, that category is broadly used within GitLab. So there's a couple of questions here. I'm going to go ahead and verbalize Mech's question and then answer it. And then Joanna, I think you have a question as well. So Mech's question was, do you have insights on what's next? What's the next list of work that will improve paid GMAU? We do. The list of work that will improve that is adding telemetry for all of the paid features first. So once we can count those things, we can show them on a graph. So that is step one. We have an epic for that. You can link to the epic from the performance indicator page, which includes our graph and all of the improvements that we're working to make. And then from a new feature set perspective, the code coverage data for groups will be a premium feature. And so we'll be working to promote that with TAMs through social, all of those things to get users working with that or engaging with that feature. That is the next new feature in that regard. After that, it'll likely be enhancements to the code quality report, which is also a paid feature. and just making that a lot more usable. That is currently the one thing that we are tracking, and it is very low usage. So we'd love to see some enhancements there to make that more functional, more widely used, and engaged with. And Joanna, I'll let you, because I've been dominating, verbalize your question.
Sure, thanks, James. Yeah, so my question was kind of along the same lines, like if we've picked an MVC or a category that we want to focus on moving higher in maturity level.
Yeah. So if you look at the maturity graph or maturity page, and I'm just going to go ahead and bring that up real quick. So if you look at our maturity plan, sorry, here we are. So today is August 27th. Code testing and coverage is the next category that is scheduled to make a move. We've started the process of going through the category maturity scorecard, the CMS, to measure if we are at a viable state for that. And you can actually see on the top of the page what constitutes viable. This is a new process that we're going through in measuring maturity for a category. So code testing and coverage is the next one. After that, we'll be looking at code quality. And so part of that is working on those dog fooding items. We've had some great discussions internally with the folks on the GitLab team and some other folks about what is preventing them from more widely using the code quality feature as it stands. And so we've identified some key deliverables there. They're included in a maturity epic for code quality. And I'll link back to that in the video notes and in the agenda of what we need to do to kind of solve the problems, get to the outcomes that they need to make more broad use of that. The nice thing is that also overlaps with a lot of the feedback that we're getting from customers about how we can make the code quality feature set better for them and start to replace some of the other code quality vendors that they have in place. So that helps us become that single tool across their DevOps toolchain. So they're not reliant on integrations even, or other third-party tool sets outside of GitLab. You're seeing all of that in one interface. Does that answer the question for you, Joanna?
Yep, thanks.
Awesome. Love it. All right. And then Kyle, who also is not present today, had a status update for us. Thank you for collaboration on the work that we're doing on the test file finder. They've replaced the GitLab or TFF.
All summer, I read through those already.
Thank you.
Kind of dense. I'll just so they've merged into the main GitLab project using the TFF tool, the gem, instead of using the built-in GitLab helper function. So now TFF is in fact being dogfooded by the main GitLab project. Nice. I believe the other merge request he has open was to put that in to one other place where they were using the TFF helper function that's built in instead. So they did they did most of it in the first MR, and then the second MR is to do the tricky bit with the CE and EE pipeline file matching. So that looks like it's all coming down the pipe and looks like it's going well. And so I'll just continue. I'm pretty happy about that. Now that we're dog fooding it, I think that I can feel confident to try and get that gem included in the project part of product list for metrics, because we are using it in GitLab proper now. So adding it to that list should be easy, but I guess we'll see. It still requires executive approval to add it to the project part of product CSV file, and then get it into our metrics and kind of allow that merge request into that file to be counted in the MR rate or into that project.
Cool. So I'll verbalize Mech's a couple of comments. Great to see this update. I'd request help to ensure that documentation is pulled in early for the add-ons we are shipping. I think that that's following our existing process of working with Marcel to ensure that we have documentation updates for TFF as we're making them. And Another point from Beck, once this lands, it would be good to see if this helps with the customer portal. From my understanding, TFF is currently disabled there. My brain's not connecting what customer portal means, though. Can anyone help?
I can
explain
speak
to
to
me?
that. Yeah, sorry. That's where I enabled the actual template initially, but they had optimized their pipeline so well that it actually ended up costing us quite a bit more to have it enabled than not. So I've gone back and forth on a few different implementations of just trying to get the TFF gem enabled. Most recent one was trying to go back and see after my last talk with our brief interchange about what was it? Interruptible. Yeah, to figure out if I could figure out a way just through CI to go back and do it. And I'm about to loop Drew back in on some bash stuff because I bashed my head against the wall on that long enough. So that's kind of a next step there.
And I think we're talking about the same thing here. I remember seeing some like CI minutes breakdown from you. That was super helpful. My read of it was that the TFF logic looks good for the failure cases, and the less useful part was the template. And the CI configuration of TFF ended up being inefficient. Because the failure cases were good, but overall we saw a huge increase by adding the job to the pre-stage. And so the goal here is going to be trying to reconfigure TFF in a narrower way to not add all those minutes. Is that accurate?
Right. It's scaling it down just to a single job within a pipeline as opposed to the entire stage.
Right.
So that's kind of similar to what Albert's doing, but what Albert is doing, the logic there is not going to be something that we use in the customer portal because we don't have this CE versus EE issue going on. So he's got some more complicated logic that's not going to apply. So there's not really going to be an impact of Albert's work into trying to get that back into the customer portal.
Well, I think
So
that,
I think that,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was just going to say, I think that answered my question, which was if this work that Albert had been working on overlaps with what Zeph was working on. And my concern was that we were reinventing the wheel a little bit, but it sounds like there is some overlap, but like we still kind of need the two different approaches. Is that right, Zeph?
We're doing the same thing, but Albert's code won't work in the customer portal.
Gotcha, thanks. Sorry, James.
No problem. We said exactly the same thing. That answered your question. So real quickly, the roadmap for the rest of dog fooding. There are 3 items on here, 2 of which I should share a screen to show this. 3 items on here, one of which is not scheduled, which is just add an example to the examples page. The other 2, I think I bumped one of these out a milestone and left the other, but I think that they would go potentially sequentially, not in parallel, to incorporate coverage detection for Ruby and then incorporate coverage detection for more languages. And that is pretty hand wavy as far as what those might be. And if there's a way to do that that is a little more agnostic, kind of the way that we did with the running the test for the new and modified files, where it would pick up across multiple languages through a really simple mapping. So I'd love to hear from the customers who we have, Zeph and Joanna, and from our engineers that we have, Ricky and Drew, what makes more sense here to tackle next? And does the timing of it, scheduling it a couple of milestones out, where we deliver in about 2.5 months, make sense? Or is this something that just isn't the highest priority right now and we can further backlog it?
if we're just going for adoption, probably I think coverage detection for more languages at the moment, because in a very straightforward, simple pipeline, I think the template generally works. We've shown that already.
From my perspective, I think it would be great to get Kyle's perspective on what is important too, because they're the team that's kind of working on tooling the main GitLab project to try and optimize it further. From what my, I guess, half-baked and or harebrained idea would be is to look at the Shopify blog post about selectively running tests and seeing if we could somehow incorporate that type of strategy into the gem.
Yeah.
That seems like a big thing though, especially because it involves a lot of like we'd probably have to execute a bunch of different programs from within the gem on the terminal so that we could build the traces out so that we know what tests are covering what things, that we know what tests we need to run in a given situation without actually using coverage. Because I think like the Shopify blog post says, the coverage reports aren't necessarily a great and truthful mechanism for deciding what tests you need to run all the time, particularly if your goal is to only ever run a subset of the tests on merge request pipelines. So I think right now we're kind of doing a really naive approach. From what I understand, engineering productivity is basically saying, oh, there's no backend changes in this MR, it's just front end changes, so we'll just run the front end tests. So I think from my perspective, that's what I'm like, don't quote me, but I think that's what they're doing. And which is good, but if we could get it even tighter where, okay, there's backend changes, but we're only going to run these tests because they're the only possible tests that would pass through the part of the code that was modified.
Yeah.
So that'd be cool.
So the dog fooding plan that we have is based on the kind of the steps that Albert laid out in one of our initial feedback issues. So so the next steps would just be validate the latest change that we have. Does it get us to an improvement that we're happy with, where with incorporating the gem into the main project, we have what we want? Of this can be outside of dog fooding, and we've satisfied that requirement. And I think that it could be using the code coverage or taking other strategies like the Shopify model. Does that seem reasonable, Ricky?
Yeah, I think I was almost thinking that it would be cool to just kind of skip over the coverage stuff, because it's kind of been there, done that, and a lot of different tools provide that functionality. Yeah. And so if we could kind of leapfrog it right into the kind of final goal, then that might be cool. And I also think that like the dog fooding has begun, we're officially dog fooding it. And without either, I think there's like two avenues forward. We kind of need to talk to engineering productivity and figure out like, okay, what's the next thing that's on your mind now that you've started using this gem. And then the other avenue is with Zeph, trying to figure out how it can be made effective for the customer portal. So I think those are kind of our two natural dog fooding pathways, but I don't know. That's the way I'm thinking about it. I don't know what you all think.
Hey, Burke. Zeph or Joanna, you want to weigh in on that?
I'm also, I think with Ricky about like digging in more, like a bit deeper on our approach to how we're picking the tests. That way that we have like a solution that's, again, like it feels more mature, rather than having like more MVC type of implementations that like do like a little bit but don't quite get our customers like the value that we're trying to provide.
Sure. Okay. So I think next steps then would be go back to engineering productivity. I can set up some time with Kyle to talk through in a couple of weeks how it's going with the current implementation they have. If we've met the objectives of the dog fooding issue, and we can close that out. And we can talk at that time, what are some more broad outcomes? And we can start to work with the wider community about, now, great, we want to see how you're using this. What are the other outcomes that we can help provide? Here's the direction we're thinking about going, piggybacking on that Shopify blog of running fewer tests based on code paths and what's likely to be executed based on the files you've changed.
I think it'd be interesting to ask when we're having that conversation with Kyle, what the, I guess, what would it have to do for us to convince them to run a subset of tests instead of the whole suite? I know that was one of like the takeaways from the Shopify blogs, that they're just, we don't run all the tests anymore.
Would that be on MR pipelines or like the nightly scheduled pipelines?
I'm guessing merge request pipelines. There's more of those. They're a narrower slice. It seems like the natural pick to me, but I guess I don't really know the answer to that.
Yeah, Shopify will always run the entire test suite on like before they deploy, right? Before their release goes out, they're running the entire test suite on the primary brand.
Right. But I guess I'm interested in what kind of confidence we would need to be able to give them as a customer to say, okay, this really is good enough. We're going to stop running all the tests. Like, I don't know what their evaluation criteria for that would be, but I think it'd be cool if we did have that. That seems like a good defined objective.
Like that would certainly help lead to the key result of cheaper pipelines, right? If we're not running all 174,000 tests every MR pipeline.
Yeah, and we don't have to start from scratch with that. The whole Shopify dynamic analysis approach, that's something that some folks at TopTal had created. It was an algorithm that what's his name? He's at GitHub now, one of the main Ruby guys, contributors.
Patterson?
Yes, thank you. Aaron Patterson. He had suggested it, and these two engineers at TopTal actually put it together in a gem called Crystal Ball. So it actually does that. It does all the mapping. It traces all the method calls. So you can see exactly where these things happen, both in the app as it's running and within the test, so it can map the two together. And then you select those tests based upon that mapping. So there's some difficulties that Shopify calls out with, like the mapping getting behind, some things like that. But we have some work already done for us if we want to figure out how to make use of that and take that further step.
Cool. I think we have a good framework then for the discussion with engineering productivity.
One thing, just to let's continue to hit this horse, is what would be interesting is, since we already know that engineering productivity is running a subset of the tests depending on the files that are in the MR, I wonder if we could get them to replace that functionality with the test file finder gem. And that might be a little thing that we can do to kind of dig in deeper.
Sounds good. So that would be the target outcome for us. That is, replace that current functionality of don't run all the tests depending on the files modified with the TFF template, or an implementation of the gem as part of the pipeline. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think, well, just basically replace however they're doing it now with the gem. So I don't know what they're doing right now to pick and choose whether they're going to run the backend test or not, but it's probably doable with the TFF gem. And if it's not, then that's a good point for us to dig in and do a small improvement so that we can get it.
Yeah. It could be interesting too to start reaching out outside of our internal customers, just thinking more broadly as the testing product manager to other, to our customer base who potentially is also using or developing and Ruby on Rails, because that seems to be where it's going to be most applicable. Or it's going to be the easiest maybe for us to support and say, hey, have you started using this? Would this replace whatever methodology you have to try to run fewer tests in your MR pipelines? I think, Drew, you were going to make a point and I totally cut you off. All right. I wanted to just touch on real quick the other dog fooding things that are going on. We talked a little bit about code quality already. There's some key things that we're going to develop there, including blocking a merge on a degradation, including the code quality information in the diff MR, which the team has a lot of experience with parsing data and presenting it there based on a current community contribution. I'm hoping that we can leverage some of that knowledge to make that an easy thing. Those are the two that really stick out mentally that I've been thinking about. There's another one that I cannot recall for the life of me right now. Accessibility testing. I'm working on figuring out what do we need to do to start to include the accessibility template as part of our just standard pipelines, so that as we're looking at, or as we're making front-end changes and deploying review apps, that we're starting to run a scan there and look at how the accessibility is changing. And then visual reviews, which I'm starting to poke at a lot more because A, it has really low usage, and B, it's a paid feature. So starting to understand how we can dog food that and tell that story about how it's helped us internally get better feedback faster out of the review apps that we're already deploying, so that engineers can more quickly make the changes that they need to make based on feedback from the rest of the team or the product manager, whoever that might be. And then Parker, you said no need to verbalize, but you were at commit all day yesterday. Would love to hear how it went.
Yeah, sure. I didn't know if we would have time or not, but it was just a cool confirmation for what I've seen on the direction page and kind of what I've gathered from some conversations here around code coverage. So there's a customer that is a DevOps engineer at USAA. If I remember correctly, I believe his name was Michael Baker. And he came and we talked for about an hour because it was a slow period during the booth, and he started asking some questions, and I'm talking about what really aligns with the validate, verify, and testing category here. And he was saying it was really neat that we had this direction page. He had no idea that we were building this, and they are currently building like essentially a code coverage for groups internally right now. So I told him, hey, keep an eye out, right? Send him to the issue, said, leave a comment, say, feel free to participate, give a thumbs up, right? Let us know that you're working on this, and this is something that will be very helpful. So I thought that was cool to see, and that's validation for y'all and what you're working on, and that will be useful for customers, and that it'll save them time too, right? Because they're obviously investing in that right now. And he said, at the end of the day, it'd be really awesome. He's like, I don't want to have to do a lot of work to find out the information I need. He's like, if the badges just signify what the info that we need to see now, and we can have a trend and visualize it, and my manager can look at it and go, bam, this is what I need to see. That's kind of where he was getting at. So that was a really cool thing. And we've talked about that a few times. So I just thought that would be neat for y'all to hear.
That's awesome.
Overall commit went really well though. It's hard when you do a virtual event like that. I was at the demo booth for most of it and then checked out some other things, but traffic was steady and it wasn't overwhelming. So we were able to have conversations like I just kind of expressed consistently throughout. It was cool.
All right. Well, anything else from the internal folks, Drew or Ricky, anything you want to ask Joanna and Zeph while we have their undivided attention today?
I'm good. Thank you.
All right, as always, thank you for helping take notes. Joanna, Ricky, you're rock stars at that, and I am not. I'll get this posted up to Unfiltered before lunch, my lunch, which is only in about an hour, and put the link back into quality, group testing, and in the agenda, so everyone has access. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, James.
Well,
Cheers.